In this video, you're going to learn everything you need to know about TypeScript any and TypeScript unknown, as well as the differences between the two and when you might want to use unknown and when you might want to use any. So first off, any is a special type in TypeScript that allows you to prevent type checking or type errors for a particular value. So when you use the any type, you can assign any value to whatever variable that you give that type of any to, and it will prevent type checking errors, and it will basically just make it like you're writing JavaScript. So here in this example on line 14, I have a let declaration and I just have the label of X, and I give it the type annotation of type any. And here I assign it to the value of 12. But as you can see, I can assign this to any other value in JavaScript. I can assign it to a string. I can assign it to an array here. I get no errors because this is an any type. It is technically a top type in TypeScript, meaning that it is the broadest type that you can have, and you can fit any value into this type, and you can assign any value to it. And you can also assign an any type to any other type. So here, since my label of X or my variable X has the type of any, I can assign that to a type number. I could assign it to a string. I could assign it to a Boolean. It doesn't matter. You can assign an any type to any other type. And in general, it's probably a good idea to avoid using the any type as much as possible, as it basically takes you back to just vanilla JavaScript. And it removes the benefits of using TypeScript in the first place. And it removes that type safety. So in general, I would use the any type pretty sparingly. Now, it can be useful, as I mentioned here, when you are migrating a project over from just JavaScript over to TypeScript and you want to incrementally change that project from being JavaScript to TypeScript, then it's probably a good idea to use some any types and gradually have that changed over. And I think that it's a reasonable thing to use, and it's actually very useful to use in that situation. But for the most part, I would try to avoid using the any type as much as possible because you remove that type checking. Now, the unknown type, it is similar to any in the fact that you can assign any value to an unknown type. So just like any, I could assign a string, a number, a Boolean, any of those types I can assign to an unknown type. And like I say here, both of these types can be considered top types because they are the most broad types. You can fit any kind of value into these types, and you can assign any value to an unknown. However, unlike the any type, you can only assign an unknown type to either any or unknown. So here in this example, I have a label X here again, and I give it the type annotation of unknown. So it is an unknown type. And I assign a string to it, which is totally fine. I could assign any data type to an unknown, like I said earlier. It could be a number, it could be a Boolean, it doesn't matter. And then as you can see here on line 44, I can assign an unknown type, this X label, to an any type. And I can also assign this unknown type to another type of unknown. So I can do this as well. However, when I try to assign this unknown type to this type of number, I get an error. And it says type unknown is not assignable to type number, which kind of makes sense. If I am saying that this label or this variable here is of type number, but I don't know this type is unknown, then I can't assign it to a type of number because a number type is strictly for a number. It's not for types that you don't know the type of. But if I change this to an any, what you can see is that this does work because in any type, that will fit the mold of any value, whether it's a number, a string, Boolean, so on and so forth. All right, so that is one difference between unknown and any. And I would say maybe the biggest difference is what we're about to talk about. And that is that you can't access an unknown type or perform certain operations on an unknown type unless you first do some sort of type narrowing. Rather than having your broad unknown type, you'll have to narrow that down to a more narrow type. So like a number, string, Boolean, before you can perform these operations. So let me keep my X label here and I'm going to reassign it to unknown here. And then right here, I try to call x.toUppercase. And like, if I look at this, well, this is a string value here, and maybe this isn't as clear because it's the string of true, but let me just do hello here to make it more clear. But this is a string value here, which it has a toUppercase method, just like all strings in JavaScript, but I can't access this operation here. And that is because this is of type unknown. TypeScript is telling me that, hey, we don't know that this value here is going to have the toUppercase method because it is an unknown type. And this is exactly what this error gives me. Property toUppercase does not exist on type unknown. However, if I want to access a toUppercase method, well, that method is available on strings. So I need to make sure that this value is a string. And one way you can do this is you can use an if statement. So I can say if type of x, if my variable x here is of type string, then access toUppercase. And as you can see, this works because it knows that by the time I get to this line of code, this is going to be a string variable, and it's going to allow me to access the toUppercase method. So that is an example of narrowing your type so you can use these operations, because an unknown type, it's not going to let you access these operations until you do this. But if this was an any type and I just try to access this straight away, it's going to let me, because in any type, it's just like JavaScript. It's going to allow me to do any of these operations without first narrowing this type. All right. But let me switch this back to an unknown here. And what I want to show you is another way of narrowing your types. So you could also use a type assertion. And I generally would prefer an if statement over a type assertion, as you can kind of assert that a label is any type when you use a type assertion. And I think it's a little bit safer to use some sort of if check or conditional like this, but you could do something like this to where I have a variable here called upper and I assign it to my label of x, which is unknown. However, I use a type assertion here. I say as string. So for whatever reason, by this line of code, I'm telling TypeScript that, hey, I know that this is going to be a string right now. So I'm typecasting it to a string. And then I can access upper.toUppercase. But if I said number here, it wouldn't let me, because a number doesn't have a toUppercase method. All right. So you could also use type assertions here to narrow your types. But in general, I would prefer using an if statement, because like, as you can see right here, my label X, it's not a number here. It's actually a string, but I'm saying it's a number, which is incorrect. So you could have an incorrect assertion with here. But if you have this conditional right here, well, you're going to check with JavaScript that it is a string. Like, no matter what, there's no way that this isn't going to be a string when you get to this line of code. All right. So I like those a little bit better, but you could do something like the assertion here in certain circumstances. All right. So both any and unknown are top types in TypeScript that can represent any value. However, with unknown, you cannot assign an unknown type to any value. You can only assign an unknown to a type of any or unknown, whereas you can assign an any type to any value. And then to access properties and operations on an unknown type, you first need to type narrow with either a conditional or an assertion or something like that. And in general, I think that since unknown has these different kind of features to it, it does make it more type safe compared to just using any's in your program. So if you do need to use a top type like this, I would recommend trying to use an unknown first and then using some sort of type narrowing in your program to then use that unknown, rather than just using the any type. All right. So hopefully this gives you a good understanding of any versus unknown in TypeScript, and I will see you in that next one.